So the screen is visible, hopefully. Okay. Now, in the classical theory, in fact, in the Keynesian theory also, aggregate demand has three components in a closed economy: consumption, investment, and government spending. G, C, I, and G. I is, of course, private investment. Now, this the components of aggregate demand plays a role in determining the interest rate. Unlike the Keynesian case, when R changes, there is no change in aggregate demand. In the classical model, what simply happens is, if we define AD as C plus I plus G, what happens is that there will be a shift from one component to another. A shift from G to I, a shift from C to I, whatever. There will not be any increase in aggregate demand. Okay. Now, how do we get this result? So, in order to get this, we have to first understand how we arrive at equilibrium in the investment market. Now, in the investment market, we have two types of agents. One type of agents seeks or demands funds opposite to them is another group of agents who seek to borrow funds. Okay. So be a bit careful. When I'm talking of funds, you have people who want to lend out funds. You have people who want to borrow this money. Okay. So who lends out money? The households. And who borrows the money? Well, we have two types or two groups. One is the private businessman. We also have the government sector. If the government's spending is more than taxes, you have a budget deficit, and part of this budget deficit can be funded through public borrowing or public debt. Now, how is this borrowing and lending occur? It occurs in the form of buying and selling bonds. Now we assume that the bonds are perpetual bonds, what we called consols. So if a person issues a agency or agent, a firm or the government issues a bond, it continues till forever, perpetuity, and every year the person who is issuing the bond will pay some interest rate. So what is this interest rate? This is the cost to the firms who are issuing the bonds and therefore borrowing money. It is the cost of borrowing. To the households who buy the bonds and therefore lend the money, it is the returns to savings. They do not consume their income, they save part of it, and this part is invested in bonds. So the interest rate is the returns to savings. Okay, is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now you have to be a bit careful of the terminology. If you demand funds, what will you do in the bond market? You will supply bonds. Okay. So firms, the government sector who require funds, they will supply bonds in the bond market. On the other hand, the households, consumers who supply funds, they will demand the bonds. So in the bond market, they are the demanders. Okay, you can see over here. Supply of funds means you're demanding bonds. Demand for fund means you're supplying or issuing bonds. Okay. Okay. So as I've said, you have two groups of people who demand funds and therefore issue the bonds. One is the government. If they have a balanced budget, G minus T is equal to 0, it's fine. But if they have a budgetary deficit, G is greater than taxes, then this has to be financed somehow. Possibilities are increasing the tax rate. You can monetize the deficit, that is, you can increase the money supply. But here we are focusing on the third method of funding or financing deficit, which is public borrowing, issuing bonds. Now, just as in the Keynesian case, the government demand, G, this is not a endogenous variable. It is an exogenous variable which is determined by the policymakers. So it is an exogenous policy variable. It depends upon the policies of the government. The market forces will not influence it. So it is, in other words, it is given to the system or constant if you want. The second group of agents who demand funds and therefore issue bonds are the firms. Now, as I've said before, and I hope you understood, suppose you have n number of projects at a particular time, and the projects give a return pi 1, pi 2, pi 3, pi n. So that means the first project I1 gives you a return of pi 1. The second project I2 gives you a return of pi 2. The last project IN gives a return of pi n. Okay. Suppose these interest rates are 2, 3, 3.5, 3.7, like this, 4.1, so on. Okay. So this is the returns from the project. You can say this is the revenue. But in order to invest in the firm, you also have to, you're issuing bonds. So you also have to pay, let us say, 4% interest rate. This is the bond rate of interest. So if you're paying, let us say, the project cost is 100 rupees. So the first project gives you a return of 2 rupees. And you have to pay an interest rate of 4%, that is 4 rupees. So your revenue is 2, your cost is 4. What is your profit, therefore? It will be negative. So you will not invest in the first project. So which of the projects will you invest in? Will you invest in the first 4 projects? No. In each case, the returns is lower than the cost of 4%. The firm will invest in the last 3 projects. In this project 4.1, you're getting a very low rate of return, net return. Here the return is slightly higher, 0.5. Here it is 2%. If your return changes, the profitability, which of the investments will be profitable, that will change. If your interest rate goes up to 5, then only the last project will be viable. On the other hand, if your interest rate falls then to 2.5 suppose, we see that these 3 projects also becomes feasible. So that means if the interest rate goes up, the number of viable projects decreases and investment will fall. On the other hand, if interest rate falls, you have a larger number of projects which are viable, and so investment will increase. So that means investment is a function of rate of interest and it is a negative function. Okay. So therefore, private investment is a decreasing function of R while G is exogenous. So the total investment I plus IP plus G is a negative function of R. Okay. Is there any question up to this point?
ভায়াবল প্রজেক্টের জায়গাটা আরেকবার বলবেন?
মানে এই জায়গাটা আমি যখন বলছিলাম, আচ্ছা, আচ্ছা, না এটা একটু এক্সেলে বলি তাহলে সুবিধা হবে। I need a table. So let us say you have got some projects. Oh, Baba. ঠিক আছে, H is enough for us. So I've got H, A, B, C, D, 8 projects. And let us say that we rank them according to the rate of interest. Rate of return, sorry. Let us make it.
Sir, can you zoom in a bit, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. So you can see this is the revenue to the firm. So if they spend 100 rupees, they are going to get 2 rupees. But this is gross. What is the cost? The cost is that they have got the money, the capital required to invest through issuing bonds. And we assume that the bond is issued at 4% interest rate. Okay. So what is the net returns? The net returns will simply be your revenue minus cost. Right? So that means if you invest in project A, you are going to incur a loss of 2 rupees. Here the loss is 1 rupee 50 paisa. Okay. So these are the loss making projects. So that means this is not viable. These projects are not viable. But these projects now become viable. Let's use the color green. These are loss making. Okay. This is now suppose the interest rate goes up. So instead of 4, let us say the interest rate becomes 6. Right? Look at these two projects. Are they still viable?
No, sir.
So as the interest rate goes up, R increases, the number of viable projects goes down. Right? Let us suppose for convenience that all the projects requires exactly 100 rupees. So how much were you investing here? So what is I over here? How many projects are you investing? 4 projects. So that means you're investing 400 rupees. Right? In this case, how many projects are viable? 2 projects. So what is the amount of funds that you require?
200.
Right? Okay. Now let us take the case of a R decreases. Let us say 3.5. What happens now?
ভায়াবল প্রজেক্টগুলো বেড়ে নাম্বার অফ ভায়াবল প্রজেক্টটা বেড়ে যাবে।
কত টাকা লাগবে তোমার? এখন কোনগুলো হচ্ছে?
400ই হচ্ছে। না 500।
500.
হ্যাঁ, slight increase. So now investment is 500. তাহলে আমরা কি দেখছি? যদি if R increases, your investment comes down from 400 to 200. If R decreases, investment is going to go up. Right? So that means we are going to have the investment function will be negatively sloped. So is it clear now?
So in this slide,
Let me-
like in the demand for funds slide,
Yeah.
I think I got disconnected when you were explaining the second line.
Okay.
That
Okay,
is,
I'll just come to
okay,
it. Let me
okay.
just put a point over here. This is negative. Yeah, you mean this much over here, government spending.
Yes, sir, exactly. Could you please repeat?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so what I'm saying, so far what we have discussed is the uh, private demand for funds, demand for funds by the private firms. But apart from the firms, the government may also demand funds. They have a deficit, budgetary deficit. G is greater than T. This deficit has to be financed. As you'll see later on, we have three options before us. One is we can increase money supply, what is called monetization of the budget deficit. Two, we can increase taxes. The third is the government can issue bonds. That is what we call public borrow,
Okay,
public
sir.
debt.
Okay, okay.
But this part is a constant. It is a policy, exogenous policy variable. So just as in the Keynesian case, G is equal to G bar. Only the private investment part can change
স্যার
with
ডেফিসিটটা কি
interest.
করে মনিটাইজ করছে মানে ওই জায়গাটা বুঝলাম না।
মনিটাইজ করছে মানে আমি অপশন বলছি, ওই জাস্ট ওই তোমার নিউ নোট ফান্ড করলো।
হ্যাঁ, কিন্তু সেটাই তো মানিটা ইনক্রিজ করলো, মানে গভর্নমেন্টের ওয়েলথটা তো ইনক্রিজ করলো না।
না,
মানে
যেটা হচ্ছে,
সাপ্লাই অফ মানি বাড়লো।
হ্যাঁ, কিন্তু যেটা দেখো তোমার ক্ষেত্রে কি হচ্ছে, ধরো তুমি ইউ আর আর্নিং 1000 রুপিস, ক্যান ইউ স্পেন্ড 2000 রুপিস উইদাউট borrowing, without begging, borrowing or stealing? You cannot spend 2000 rupees. ঠিক আছে? গভর্নমেন্ট কি করতে পারে? গভর্নমেন্ট ক্যান স্পেন্ড 2000 রুপিস, 1000 রুপিস তারা ট্যাক্স থেকে কালেক্ট করেছে, আর বাকি 1000টা ওরা সিম্পলি তোমার জোকাতে গেল, জোকাতে গিয়ে বেহালায় যে ট্যাক্সাল আছে সেখান থেকে বললো যে তোমরা আরো 1000 টাকার নোট প্রিন্ট করে দাও।
তাহলে তো গভর্নমেন্টের কোনো ডেফিসিটই হবে না কোনোদিন।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, এক্স্যাক্টলি। বাট দিস ইজ অকারিং এক্স পোস্ট, মানে তোমার ডেফিসিটটা হলে তখনই এটা তুমি করতে পারো। মানে সেই সেন্সে আমরা যে এটা বলি, গভর্নমেন্ট অলওয়েজ নেভার হ্যাজ আ বাজেট ডেফিসিট, ইট ইজ অলওয়েজ ব্যালেন্সড, কারণ টাকাটা তো কোনো জায়গা থেকে জোগাড় করতে হবে। যেটা হচ্ছে গভর্নমেন্ট স্পেন্ডিংটা বাড়িয়ে দিল, তখন বাজেট ডেফিসিট হলো। দেন দ্য কোয়েশ্চেন কামস, how will you finance this deficit? Where will you get the extra money from? ঠিক আছে? One is public borrowing, two is you can print money supply, and third is you can issue bonds.
স্যার বাট wouldn't that lead to inflation মানে eventually? কারণ
হ্যাঁ,
আমার
মানে
একটা
দেখো,
money injection তো হচ্ছে।
প্রত্যেকটা ইস্যুর, প্রত্যেকটা পলিসির কিছু অ্যাডভান্টেজ এবং ডিসঅ্যাডভান্টেজ আছে। ঠিক আছে? তার ফলে আমরা যেটা বলি থিওরিটিক্যালি প্রিন্টিং নোট ইজ দ্য ইজিয়েস্ট অপশন, কিন্তু ওটা তো একদম, অ্যাজ ইউ আর সেইং রাইটলি, উই কান্ট অলওয়েজ ডু ইট। সো উই হ্যাভ টু ডিসাইড অ্যাট দিস ইকোনমিক কনটেক্সট what is the best option before, which is the best way to finance the deficit.
Sir, does the government does not incur like extra cost even while printing the notes?
You mean that a situation comes that they have a budget deficit, they print notes, the budget deficit goes up even further. Yeah,
So like maybe
the
for
cost is
paper
not very
purposes-
high. The cost is not very high.
Okay, sir. And so like for factories, etc.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, what were you saying?
No, means like for the factories, for the workers that they're working, like for the machines, like every industry requires a certain amount of cost.
Yeah, sure. Ha. So actually what happens is, you can say it in this way. Suppose the budget deficit is 500. So how much money must you print? 500.
Yes, sir.
But there's a cost. Let us say the cost is 50 rupees. So that means you must print 550 rupees.
Okay. Okay, so the gap is fulfilled and we incur additional cost, but which is less than the previous cost.
Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, printing new notes will not be possible. মানে ধরো তোমার কস্ট যদি 500 এরও বেশি হয়, cost of printing 500 rupee note is greater than 500. The deficit is simply going to go up.
Yes, sir.
So then the government will just remove the 500 mark and place it in 2000.
ওই 2000 এর খরচাটা আরো বেশি। মানে I think it is Upanita, right, who is making the comment?
Yes, sir.
হ্যাঁ, মানে what Upanita is saying is, তুমি যে অ্যামাউন্টটা প্রিন্ট করবে, কস্ট অফ প্রিন্টিং ইজ গ্রেটার। তুমি যাই করবে না কেন, তোমার ডেফিসিটটা বাড়তেই থাকবে। So fortunately, that's not the situation. The cost is not very high. That is one. Now the question is, I mean, suppose the inflation rate is very low. What will you do in that case? If you print money, the money supply goes up and there is inflation. Will it be a major problem if you start from a very low rate of inflation?
No, sir.
Sir, but if I continue doing this, মানে আমার যখনই deficit হচ্ছে আমি টাকা ছাপিয়ে নিলাম আরো।
Okay, so you go up, the inflation rate, let us say, now becomes 20%, 25%. Then, as you are again saying rightly, the policy will no longer be viable. You have to shift to some other form. So, which policy you will choose depends upon the current economic context. In certain circumstances, মানে ধরো, when the COVID lockdown started, Abhijit Binayak Banerjee, Raghuram Rajan, they were saying that the Reserve Bank should increase the money supply. The budget deficit would rise, government should spend more, budget deficit should rise, but even if it leads to inflation, the human costs justify the policy.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, but there are additional factors. Means the government did not follow this policy because, sir, bond rating would fall and capital would flee and exchange rate also. Means other factors are also there. That is why they did not go for this kind of printing of money.
See, there are two things. Firstly, what you're saying is right. Every policy has a plus minus. I was just illustrating. Okay. And secondly, I mean, compared to the economic cost, capital flight at that time, was it a very important issue? If India's rating goes down, what is more important? India's rating, the rating of policymakers, or the lives of people?
So, but wouldn't the
Debt
resultant
was also high at that time. Debt to GDP ratio at that time was also high. So they could not afford to let the investors go worry about their situation.
Anyway, you can have a particular opinion whether at a particular context what sort of policy is suitable. The point that I'm trying to make is that depending on your ideology, depending on the economic context, if the government has a budget deficit, then the government will go for a particular method of funding it. Okay, so it is What method is chosen depends upon the government ideology and the current economic context. So, it is given to the economy. It is exogenous to the economy. That is the point that I'm trying to make. Which method is good or bad? Well, you will see what the impact of policy making is. Friday or maybe next week. Pritika, I think you were saying something when on
Yes,
said
sir.
about
I mean,
GDP ratio.
the economists, they were saying that the money should be given like from the Keynesian logic, like it would fire up everything. But like, wouldn't the resultant
Yes.
inflation rate, even in the long run, like, wouldn't it have backfired like to the public, like which they were justifying as like human costs and all?
এক্স্যাক্টলি, মানে মানির ভ্যালিউটা তো চলে যাবে।
Like the benefits would be short-lived. I mean.
Okay. So if the money supply increased, if the government introduced a cash transfer policy, what will happen to aggregate demand? It is going to shift rightwards. Right. It is going to shift from here to here.
Sir, I had a question here. Sir,
No, just a minute. Let me just finish, please. So the aggregate demand is going to shift like this, right? Suppose you have a Keynesian type demand function. You have below full employment output. What is the impact of the cash transfer?
Sir, can you please repeat the question?
Okay. Ignore the green part. I'll remove this. Suppose you have a Keynesian case. At that time, during the time of lockdown, there was recession in the economy. So that means the output level is below full employment output, right? What is the supply curve in such a situation? Similar to the Keynesian case, horizontal. So in this case, if the government transfers money and there's a rightward shift in the aggregate demand curve, what is the impact on prices? What is the impact on output?
So output increases,
But prices do not change.
prices are constant.
Now let me remove the blue line and bring the green line. This is the classical case.
So the opposite happens. Output doesn't change because output is at full employment, but the price increases, that it leads to inflation.
Well, what I heard was cling cling plong. I hope that is not the answer you meant. Yeah, so as you wanted to say, prices rose, output was constant. Right. So it depends really on where you believe the economy to be. Okay.
Yes, sir.
If you believe that the economy is in a Keynesian case, the cash transfer policy is justified. If you believe that you're in the classical case, what the government did was right. Possibly the truth is in between.
excuse me, sir. Sir, but it was supply shock as well. Means
Yeah, sorry.
there were bottlenecks in supply chain, so the supply has to be affected. It cannot be horizontal. Yes, sir, like this.
Yeah, but at the same time, you have to realize that the supply side bottlenecks occurred only during the lockdown. Once the lockdown was removed, travel restrictions were removed, uh, the internal blockages should have gone away. And secondly, is it not the government's responsibility to intervene if there are supply side blockages? Should not the government have intervened to remove the blockages? I mean, take the case when the COVID cases were rising, there was a shortage of supply blockage in many commodities considered to be essential: medicine, oxygen, etc. So it was the government's responsibility to remove these blockages. So I don't think the government can go away simply by saying that it's a perfect, there's lockdown, output cannot be increased. Yeah, I mean, just during the lockdown, it was something like this, but why? So, I mean, there are many issues over here. Let us not, okay, I mean, yeah, it's good that you're raising these issues, but try to realize the point that I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that uh, if there's a budget deficit, what method the government should follow to cover this deficit does not depend upon is not determined endogenously within the system, but it is determined by the policymakers, and therefore it is given to the system. So it is the government who decides whether I'm going to issue bonds or not, how much bonds I'm going to issue, whether I should issue money supply or not. No, whether the choice is correct or not, it may be correct, it may be wrong, that is different. But what I'm trying to say is, as far as we are considering this classical model, this G bar is constant. Okay. So it is not a function of, let us say, price or employment or output. It is constant, just as in the Keynesian case. It is determined by the policymakers. Private investment, on the other hand, is a function of interest rate. Private investment is endogenous. Okay, so is this point clear?
Yes, sir.
Later on, when
Sir.
I'm going to cover the policy issues, so then again you'll see that there are choices, the impact, what type of, the way that you fund the deficit will have an impact on the model and so on. But at this moment, let us not go into the issue. Yeah, Prithviraj, I think, was saying something.
Yes, sir. My question was that will the government borrowing remain same irrespective of the interest rate?
Yes, সেটাই আমি বলছি। G is a constant, G bar. এটা পলিসি মেকিংই ঠিক করবে, পলিসি যে আমি এটা ফান্ড করব কি করব না। আমার একটা ডেফিসিট হয়েছে, আই হ্যাভ আ ডেফিসিট, will I fund it through budget deficit, public debt or monetization or whatever? It depends on my decision, not on interest rate, etc.
Okay, sir, got it.
আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে। So on the demand side, look into this equation carefully. This is the I is the total investment. It has two components, private investment and government spending. The G, which is public borrowing, not actually the entire government spending, but only the bond financing of the deficit. The money deficit is suppose 3,000, government finances 500 by issuing bonds. So only 500 will come here, not the entire 3,000. This private investment is a negative function of interest rate. ঠিক আছে?
So why do governments only finance a portion of their deficit and not the
ও পুরোটাই করতে পারে, যদি পুরোটা করে then 3,000 will come here.
So, but like, is it like a reasonable policy decision to finance the total deficit?
Yeah, it's not reasonable, but what I'm saying is that the government decides whether it will use bond financing or not. ঠিক আছে, 3,000 এর মধ্যে কতটা এখানে আসবে সেটা গভর্নমেন্ট ঠিক করছে। গভর্নমেন্ট মে সে আই উইল নট ইস্যু বন্ডস, তাহলে জিরো হবে। গভর্নমেন্ট মে সে আই উইল ফান্ড ইট এন্টায়ারলি ফ্রম বন্ডস, তাহলে 3,000 হচ্ছে। or the government may choose an intermediate value. ঠিক আছে? So it can be 0, 500, 1,000, 2,000, up to 3,000. ঠিক আছে?
Yes, sir.
আচ্ছা, now we come to the other side, the supply of funds. So the people who are supplying funds are supplying it through the bonds. So they buy the bonds, and so the money flows from them to the firms or the government sector. So who are these persons? These are households. Households save, they have an income, they consume part of it, and the remaining part is saved and used to purchase bonds. Now, when I'm talking about consumption and savings, this is a matter of intertemporal choice. Savings is basically future consumption. So I have a choice. I can either spend my entire income today, or what I can do is I can keep aside a part of it, buy bonds, and consume in the future. Okay. So the part which is not consumed, Y minus C, that is the savings. So that means if savings goes up by 100 rupees, consumption will come down by 100 rupees. Del C and del S are mirror images of each other. Is it clear?
So could you repeat this once more?
Okay, suppose your income is 100 rupees. Okay. You're consuming, let us say for convenience, equal amount of consumption and savings, 50-50. You increase consumption by 10 rupees. How will your savings be changed?
Yes, it will decrease.
By how much?
40, like by 10 only.
Okay. Suppose your consumption falls by 20 rupees. How will your savings change?
It will increase by 20.
Okay. So that is what I'm saying. It is a mirror image. The value will have to be the same. It's what we call a dollar for dollar change. Okay, মানে তোমার কনজাম্পশন যতটা চেঞ্জ হবে, সেভিংসও অতটাই চেঞ্জ হবে। Exactly the same amount, the same numerical amount. Now, savings in the classical function, in the classical model, is assumed to be a positive function of interest rate. Why? As interest rate increases, your choice will become more tilted towards future consumption. Why is this bias? Because if you get a higher interest, so suppose you have 100 rupees now, you're getting 4% interest rate. So in the future, you're going to get 4 rupees. If the interest rate goes up to, let us say, 10%, you're getting 10 rupees in the future. So it's highly likely that you are going to increase your savings. This will enable you to increase your consumption in the future. Okay. So savings is a positive function of rate of interest. So the investment function, this part you can see is similar to the Keynesian model. Here, Keynes would have said savings is a function of income. The classical case is S is a function of R. Now, if you reduce consumption, right? Apart from, you can obviously you have to save, but you can also hoard the money. Hoard means you just keep it with you. You don't buy the bonds. You take your money, Lokhir Bhandar, Lokhir Bhandar ache, I don't know. We had the small pots made out of mud.
Say brown or red pots.
Yeah. Actually, I had Standard Chartered Bank used to give a Donald Duck to children. If a child opened a account, they were given a Donald Duck, and you had to put in money into this Donald Duck, and when it got filled, you took it to the bank. They broke open the seal, and they used to deposit it with your account. And our mothers used to filch money from your father's pockets and put it in these earthen pots. It's a very old practice, traditional practice. I'm joking, please. I mean, everyone knows it, but I mean, the fathers also used to enjoy it. Anyway, so jeta hocche je you can also hoard the money. Why do people, theoretically hoarding is possible, but if you hoard the money, you will not get any returns. So if you put 100 rupees into the Lokhir Bhandar, it will remain 100 rupees after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You will hoard. Why? In case there is some emergency. So if you expect that in normal circumstances, you require, let us say, 10,000 rupees for the first week, you will not keep 1,000. You will keep slightly more because there may be some unforeseen emergencies. You will keep 1,200, 1,500. 1,000 is to meet the normal expenditure. Part of the money is to meet unforeseen expenditure. But most of the money that is not consumed is invested. You use it to, we assume that there's no banks, so the money is invested in the form of bonds. Okay, is it clear? If you feel that investing in bonds is risky, banks can fail, there's depression, economic stress, banks can fail, so you will lose your money. In that case, you may hoard wealth in the form of money, but in normal times, whatever you save will by and large go to purchase bonds. Okay, is this part clear?
Sir, just to clarify, hoarding here means that they just illegally like hide the money. It's not in the banking system.
তুমি তোমাদের মাকে গিয়ে বলো না চাটি খাবে, কান ধরে ছিনে নেবে তোমাদের। Illegally hoarding? No, it's not necessarily illegal. what is happening is you just keep the money with you. আর কিছু না। মানে you're not keeping it in the bank, you're just keeping it in your almirah. Almirah, under the মানে বিছানার তোষকের নিচে, যেখানে হোক।
স্যার রান্নাঘর।
It's
রান্নাঘরে
illegal if it's black money.
Yeah, exactly. So you're concealing the source of income, you're not paying it. Have you seen the film Goodbye Lenin? No, I don't think so. It's a very nice film. See, the story was set in East Germany. The story starts with you have a woman who is a devoted party worker. So it's before the Berlin Wall. Do you know the Berlin Wall, by the way?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So before the two Germanies had merged, when there was still a wall, she was a very devoted party worker, and her husband defected. She got a shock. She went into depression. But anyway, over time, she recovered. Then the struggle started to unify Germany and break down the Berlin Wall. And on the TV, she saw that her son, who had grown up, she had a son and a daughter. The son was getting beaten up by the police. She went to intervene and she got knocked on the head. It was a very serious injury. She collapsed, she went into a coma, and she was admitted to a hospital. And the doctor said that we have to put her into a ventilator. We don't know when she recovers. If at all she will recover. So then what happened was, she had saved a lot of money. The Berlin Wall was broken down. Germany was unified. And then it was decided that the old East German money would become illegal. So it was something like the demonetization. And the government said that, okay, this is the deadline. Within this deadline, you have to bring all your East German money and we will convert it to Deutschmarks. The problem was that the mother was in a coma. Everyone knew that she had hoarded a lot of money, but no one knew where she had hidden it. So this is something of the problem with hoarding. If you hoard, well, in normal times it's fine, but it can also lead to problems. In fact, the story goes that she comes out of the coma. The problem is that the doctors tell her children that, look, if she gets a shock, another shock, mental or physical, then she's going to have another stroke and she's going to die. And the children were very devoted to the mothers. They had been raised by her when their father had run off. So they think about it and they realize that, look, this mother was a devoted party member. If she learns that there's no longer any Lenin or communism in Germany, she's going to get a massive heart attack, stroke, everything. So we have to hide the fact that there's a reunification of Germany. We can't let her go out. We can't let us see the national flag or Coca-Cola, because Coca-Cola was banned in Germany. She can't listen to the news. And so the remaining part of the film is how they try to protect the mother. They set up a false TV channel. It's very humorous. It is, I think, available on the YouTube. You can watch it. I mean, those my European friends, those from Germany, particularly enjoy the film. It's a nice one. Okay. Anyways, digression. Just I know it's very boring to listen to lectures on the net. Okay. So now, as I've said, we have two parts. One is the demand for funds, which is equal to the supply of bonds. The other is the supply of funds, equivalent to demand for bonds. Now, let us bring the two together. Loanable. We are discussing this in terms of funds, not in terms of bonds. I think that gave rise to confusion in the earlier class. So we are talking about people who are loaning funds, people who are borrowing funds. The households are loaning funds, the firms and the government are borrowing funds. So this is I, private investment, and this is I plus G minus T, the budget deficit. We assume for simplicity that the entire deficit is funded by through public borrowing, just for simplicity. So the gap between them is G minus T, the budget deficit. Okay. So this is private investment and this is total investment, and they are negatively sloped. The supply of funds by the household is positively sloped, and the equilibrium is given by the intersection of the net investment of the total aggregate investment, aggregate demand for loanable funds, and the supply of loanable funds at this point. Okay. So people save, households save this much, use it to buy bonds. The governments require this amount of funds, so they issue bonds equal to this amount. Okay, so savings is equal to I plus G minus T. Is this part clear?
Sir, can you show the part in the graph once again?
এই গ্রাফই তো দেখাচ্ছি, এখানে নেই, দেখতে পাচ্ছ না?
Yes, sir. Can you repeat it?
আচ্ছা, দেখো এই যে কার্ভটা, এইটা হচ্ছে তোমার প্রাইভেট ইনভেস্টমেন্ট। ওকে, ফার্মরা যে ইনভেস্টমেন্ট ডিমান্ড করছে, ফান্ডস ডিমান্ড করছে, and this is, if you add the government demand to it, it is constant. তাহলে প্রত্যেকটা অ্যামাউন্টে, প্রত্যেকটা for every hour there is going to be a parallel shift by the same amount, G minus T. So this will be same. Okay, the curve will shift parallelly and the distance will always be G minus T. So this is the total demand for loanable funds. Okay, the supply of loanable funds is this. So this is the household part. They are saving and supplying funds, right? And this is the investment, the demand for funds by the government and private firms. So what is equilibrium? Equilibrium occurs at the intersection of the demand and supply curves, which is here. The equilibrium rate of interest is R0, and this is the amount of funds. That is, you can say they are funds borrowed, funds lent out. So the funds borrowed is equal to funds lent out. ঠিক আছে?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, this part is not very, I mean, it's okay, but it's just laying the foundation for what is going to come next. This is the important part. Interest rate plays a stabilizing role in the classical system. How? This is important.
Sir, could you show the previous slide once?
ঠিক আছে উপানিতা? Or do you want more time?
Yeah, yes, sir, 30 seconds in writing.
Okay, okay. ঠিক আছে, ঠিক আছে. Don't worry. Don't talk.
Yes, sir, it's done. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay. So now we come to the role of interest rate. I mean, fine, you have demand for money, demand for bonds, supply of bonds, and you have R. What is the importance of this market for loanable funds in the classical system? Let us assume for simplicity that we start from a situation when the budget is balanced. So if the government is spending 1,000 rupees, they have imposed some taxes which fetches them 1,000 rupees. So the budget is balanced. So that means the only investment is private investment, the demand for funds by private firms. Okay? Suppose there's depression and the firms expect that the future profit is going to come down. So what I had said was, if you look at this, instead of the gross returns, this, let us suppose it becomes all the profits what has happened now? They expect that the future returns are going to go down. Look at this. This project was viable initially, but now it is no longer viable. Right? So that means investment, if you expect that your returns are going to decrease, then you're going to reduce investment. What will happen is that there will be a leftward shift in the investment function. Let me see if I've got it right. সরি আমার এই ডায়াগ্রামটা আমার এই ডায়াগ্রামটা ভুল হয়ে গেছে লেট মি জাস্ট কারেক্ট দিস So the investment decreases from I0 to I1. Okay, so the impact of depression, expectations that profit will go down, results in a inverse shift of the investment function or the demand for loanable funds. How much is the decrease? There will be a parallel shift. So this is the decrease. Del I is the decrease in investment fund. I'll repeat this again. So let me just go through. Then I'll come back to the diagram and show it to you again. Okay. So when investment people expect profit to go down, I will come down, and the amount is del I, the shift in the investment function. In that case, a decrease in I means that demand for loanable funds has gone down. So you'll have excess supply in the funds market. Your investment is demand is this, you are supplying this. You have excess supply. This excess supply will push down the interest rate from R0 to R1. This is the new equilibrium point. Okay. So, how much has investment gone down ultimately? Has investment gone down by this A and B? Investment was here, it was this. The new investment is this. So, the final reduction in investment is only A. Because your interest rate has gone down, your investment starts increasing and comes to here. The second point that we want to make is that what happens if R increases? Sorry, R has decreased over here. So if R changes, this has an impact on investment, which I've shown. A. What is the secondary impact of R? What is the other variable that R influences?
Savings.
Savings. What will happen to savings?
It will fall.
Savings is going to fall. So it will fall by this much. Sorry. See, investment has decreased by this amount, right? So this A is the decrease in impact of the savings. The supply of funds has gone down from here to here, from this point to this point. Sorry. And investment goes up from here to here. So the decline in interest rate has two effect. One is that savings is going to come down, the supply of funds will come down from here to here. Two is investment is going to be stimulated. Investment will rise from here to here. Okay. So the final effect is that investment is going to fall by an amount equal to A. Okay. Now tell me one thing. What happens to aggregate demand?
It will fall.
The
Achha.
same.
So it depends on the magnitude of change in C.
Okay. So what will happen is how much is del I? This is the decrease. So people expect investment to go down by del I. Okay. This is equal to del C and this I. Sorry, it's del I is a bit confusing.
Sir, can you show the full screen of the corrected slide?
না, একটু দাঁড়ান, আমি এখানে একটু অ্যাডজাস্ট করে নিই। So the decline in investment is offset by two forces. On the second round, your investment goes up, your consumption also increases. Okay. So therefore, the aggregate change you can see by construction, del I has to be equal to A plus B. So therefore, the decrease in investment is equal to the increase in consumption, right? Say, what is the meaning of savings decrease? It means your consumption has gone up, right? The question that Upanita had asked.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
ঠিক আছে, তাহলে so this is the decrease in savings. What does it mean? Increase in consumption. The increase in consumption is del C. What is the second round increase in investment? B. So A plus B, you can see by construction, A plus B is equal to this del I, the decrease in investment. Let me call this the second round effect. তাহলে এটাকে আমি একটা সাবস্ক্রিপ্ট দিয়ে দিচ্ছি। আর এখানে আমি যেহেতু এটা ফার্স্ট রাউন্ড, এইটা দিচ্ছি। ঠিক আছে, লেট মি এক্সপ্লেন ইট अगेन। এখানে ডায়াগ্রামটা একটু বড় করে, সরি। ঠিক আছে, is visible now? Let me explain it again. This was your starting investment, I0. You expect there's depression. You expect profits to come down. So you reduce your investment by del I. ঠিক আছে, এই অ্যামাউন্টটা তুমি ইনভেস্টমেন্ট কমিয়ে দিলে। So what happens to aggregate demand? Aggregate demand falls. By how much? Del I, which I've referred to as del I1 over here. ঠিক আছে, আচ্ছা। Now what we have is the demand for loanable funds is less. This is the demand, and the supply of loanable funds is this. So we have excess supply, and this is going to push down the interest rate. So R will fall from R0 to R1. This is the new equilibrium interest rate. Clear? When interest rate decreases, you now have two effects: demand side and supply side. The supply of loanable funds will go down. The households will feel that, okay, if the interest rate is going to come down, there's no point in saving and investing, in purchasing bonds. So they are going to reduce consumption sorry, they are going to reduce savings by an amount given by A. They have reduced the supply of loanable funds from here to here. Now, what is the reduction in savings? It is simply the increase in consumption, right? So del A, sorry, A is the increase in consumption. So that means aggregate demand now goes up. By how much? By A. Simultaneously, because the interest rate has fallen, some more projects becomes viable. So you are going to invest more. So this is the, you will require more funds. So the second round increase in investment demand is B, right? It is given by this amount. Your demand was this much initially. Because interest rate falls, it increases by this amount. Clear? So you can see that A plus B is going to be del I, or rather minus del I. Therefore, the initial fall in aggregate demand is offset by an increase in consumption demand and a second round increase in investment demand. So, the sum of private sector demand, aggregate demand, C plus I, that will remain same. What happens is a change in the composition of demand. Consumption increases, investment comes down. That is the only change that occurs. So this is also a crowding out effect. Consumption crowds out private investment. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So, could you explain the last part once? Like, consumption increases because the savings are decreasing, and in the second round, since the R is decreasing, because therefore more projects become viable, therefore investment increases in the second round, which is denoted by B. So
Yeah.
after that,
Yeah. So what is the increase in demand? This is A is the increase in consumption demand. B is the second round increase in investment demand. So what is the net increase in demand?
the
A
A
plus
plus,
B,
yes, sir.
but demand has gone down, initially gone down by del I, minus del I in fact.
Yes, sir.
So what is the final change? Minus del I plus B plus A.
Yes, sir.
What is this sum?
So minus del I is equal to A plus B.
Yeah, so if I sum them up,
0.
0,
it's
yes, sir.
0.
Yes,
So
sir.
what is the change in aggregate demand? 0.
0, yes, sir.
But what has happened is there has been a crowding out effect. Your consumption has gone up, investment has come down. So the composition of demand, the composition of AD has changed.
Sir, how is it crowding out?
Crowding out is consumption is crowding out investment, private investment.
Sir, but private investment actually rises also. The little means induced.
No, what is the net impact? Just focus on private investment. How
Yes,
much
yes,
has
sir.
private investment gone down? Del I minus del I, then
By
it
8.
rises by B. Okay, so it is del I plus B.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so how much has private investment gone down? By A. And what is A? A is the increase in consumption. So we have a perfect crowding out. Okay, is this clear? Okay, so I've got double classes, but I think we can take a 15 minutes break. Okay, so I'll stop the presentation. No point to continue. Okay. So we had started off by pointing out that aggregate demand AD is equal to C plus I plus G. G is a policy variable, just as in the Keynesian case, it is exogenous. C and I, however, both depend upon the rate of interest. I, you know why it depends upon interest rate. We have explained. The classical model argues that saving is a function of interest rate. Therefore, consumption also becomes, it's the mirror image of savings. So consumption also is a function of interest rate. So the intersection of the demand and supply of loanable funds gives the equilibrium rate of interest. And if there's any exogenous change in I, investment, there's no change in the aggregate demand. The only change is in the composition of aggregate demand. We have a crowding out effect. Consumption crowds out private investment. So R becomes, interest rate plays a very important role in the classical system. It is the first line of defense against unemployment. If there's a demand side shock, like depression, we expect profits to fall. If there's a demand side shock, this will affect only the composition of demand, not its volume. Further, even if the aggregate demand curve shifts to the left, the aggregate supply curve is vertical. So therefore, the only change is in the price. There is no impact on the labor market. So the classical model is self-adjusting. It ensures that the economy is always in full employment, and if there's any deviation from this full employment, the economy will always go back to the full employment level of output.
Sir, previous slide once, please.
This one.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay. Now, this self-adjusting property, it's the basic implication is, as you can see, that in the self-adjusting property follows from the uh, vertical aggregate supply curve. So, what does it mean? It basically means that demand is not important. It basically means that demand is not important. Whatever the level of demand, I mean, it's going to cut the. I mean, let's see, it's easier if I show it like this. See, you can see that if the level of aggregate demand changes, the only impact is on prices. Output is constant, and therefore, employment also is constant. The only problem is if we have a case like this. The volume of demand is less than the aggregate supply. Now, is this possible? Now, in the classical system, the Say's law, JBC, argued that supply creates its own demand. Now, this can be interpreted in two ways. Whatever the supply level, okay, forces will be set off that will result. So, if you have a situation like this, certain processes will be set up as a result of which the aggregate demand will rise and this amount of output, full employment output, will be demanded. But in that case, the question is, what are the processes? So if you have a situation like this, if we have excess supply, even at zero price, what is the process that will ensure that aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply at a positive price? So the difficulty of identifying such a process resulted in opting for the second interpretation of Say's law. Aggregate supply is always equal to aggregate demand. Okay, there's no scope for introducing output market to determine real income. This implies that the only role of the commodity market is the division of income between consumption and investment. It does not have any role at all. Now, before going to the next point, let us go to the backwards to the four-quadrant diagram. We had used it in the case of the ISLM curve, but let's see how we can use it in the classical model also. You can see over here we have the commodity market, prices and income. Here we have price and real wage, and this is employment levels. Now, given the quantity, from the quantity theory of money, given the supply of money, we have this curve. Sorry, there's a mistake over here. It should be so given we know that V is constant. So given M, we have a curve like this. So let us suppose that there's equilibrium. We take a point like this when the P and Y will ensure that the quantity equation is satisfied. Now, given P, the workers will bargain for a wage contract which will ensure them a real wage of WFPF, which will clear the labor market. So this is the demand and supply curve of labor. So the money wage changes, given price, money wage is adjusted so that the market clears. Once we have NF, given the production function, we can find out the full employment output. So given this full employment output, we can find out the corresponding price, we can find out the corresponding money wage, which will give me WF and PF. I have the full employment output, and so back to YF. Okay, is this diagram clear, or will I explain it again?
Will you explain the second quadrant?
এইটে?
Yes, sir.
আচ্ছা, ব্লু লাইনটা কিন্তু তোমরা দেখো না, হ্যাঁ? It's just an orange line. Now, at any point of time, you have a population. The population is fixed, and given the population, we have সরি, আমি বেরিয়ে গেছিলাম না, আমি আবার এক্সপ্লেন করছি। So given the money supply, suppose PF is 2.
So could you share the screen?
Oh, sorry. এটা হলো তো right, clear now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. দেখো, V is a constant, the central bank is issuing a certain amount of M. You know what is YF. So you can find out what is the correct combination of P, which will ensure that this is satisfied. So you get PF. Now in the labor market, the workers do not bargain for real wages. They bargain for money wages. But you can see from here what is the real wage, full employment real wage. Suppose it is 5 and suppose the price is 2. So what will be money wage?
Sir, can you please repeat again?
Real wage এর ডেফিনিশনটা কি?
Sir, W by P, that is the wages by the price level.
ঠিক আছে? So if you know what is P, can you find out what is W?
10.
Yes, sir, it's 10.
This will be 10. So what happens is the workers go to the labor market and they bargain for 10. Right? And given that prices is 2, that means we get this price, real wages, which is 5. So at this real wages, the labor market clears, you have full employment output. And so it is back to YF. The system is consistent.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, how will the worker know the real wage? Should this not explanation go clockwise from YF to NF?
অয়ন আমি তোমার কথা শুনতে পাচ্ছি না, একটু জোরে বলবে প্লিজ?
Sir, I am saying how will the worker know W by T means and then demand the correct nominal wage? Means I am saying means we should go from YF to NF and then real wage. Means
Okay.
clockwise explanation.
See, if there's unemployment, suppose you choose okay. So you don't know what is 5, right? You don't know the real wage should be 5. But you
Yes.
can observe what P is. P is 2,
Yes, sir.
right? So you know that you have to, it's W by 2, right? W by 2 is equal to you don't know what. Now you fixed W, money wage, at some level. And you see what happens in the labor market. If you have excess demand or excess supply, that means you have not chosen the correct money wage. Let me frame this in a different way. ঠিক আছে? We know that it is 5, right? But let us say Oyon doesn't know. Oyon goes and what should be money wage? It should be 10. But we don't know that also. So the workers go and say that okay, W is 20. So in that case, what will be real wage?
10.
10. Will you have full employment? Demand is greater than supply of labor, right? There's unemployment. No, sorry, it's the
Supply-
opposite. Opposite, yeah. Sorry. So you have unemployment. So then say people say that okay, let us reduce money wages. Let us make it 2. So what is W by P? This is now 1. What will happen in this case? So you're too much flexible. Now you will have demand greater than supply. Okay. So in this way, so you know that it is in between. So through a process of bargaining and observing whether there is unemployment, you can finally reach a position where this is 10 and this is 5. অয়ন ঠিক আছে?
Yes, sir.
আচ্ছা. Okay, since you're unmuted, now tell me what will happen if everything is constant, your money supply has gone up. Can you depict this on the orange line? Now this orange line will shift outwards, right? This is the new quantity theory equation. So given YF, you now have a higher price level. P is higher, goes up by this amount. But is this part changed? This part and this part? This is unchanged. So tell me, Owen, what is the only difference in the model with the earlier results?
Sir,
What are the values that have changed?
sir, nominal wage and price level.
What is the suppose prices have doubled? How much will money wage change?
Sir, double.
So that real wages remain the same. So the change in the money supply is a change in the monetary sector, right? Employment, output, these are the real sector. So does the change in the monetary variable affect the real sector or real variables?
No, sir.
What are the real variables over here?
So the real wage, then the employment,
Yes. And this,
output.
these 3 variables are unchanged. What has changed?
Money, wage, and price.
Money, wage, and price, which are monetary variables. So that means the real sector and the monetary sector are independent of each other. The real sector is not affected by the monetary sector. So this is called the classical dichotomy. Now, the classical dichotomy, to some extent, is the result of the vertical supply curve and the Say's law. Okay. Now the question is, can we have unemployment in this model? Now theoretically, when do we have unemployment? If the real wage is above the full employment real wage, WFPF. So it's something like this. Instead of this, the real wage becomes this. So the labor demand is this, the supply is this. Okay. So in that case, we will have unemployment. Okay, for instance, over here, you can see this. The labor demand is this much, labor supply is this much. Okay, so this is the level of unemployment. So this is the level of unemployment. Okay. So theoretically that can occur. So in that case, what will happen? You will have, as I've shown, the point that Owen was raising, there will be renegotiation of money wages. There'll be a fresh contract such that money wage changes, and the adjustment in the labor market can be given by this equation. dw by dt is equal to lambda minus lambda into nd minus ns. Lambda is a positive fraction which gives the rate of adjustment. If you have excess supply in the labor market, if you have unemployment, then dw by dt, that is wage rate, wage will fall over time. Given the quantity theory of money, there will be a simultaneous fall in price, but in this case, the fall in price is less than the fall in money wages. So the real wages will fall to WF by PF. Achha. Now, a little before, I had asked you that if prices double, what will happen to money wages? And the answer was that will also double. But here I'm seeing that both the fall in money wage and the fall in price, they are not of the same order. So am I contradicting myself?
So, like, is there a system where like the laborers are forming unions and going like says that there's a
না
contract
না না
set?
no. See, before আমি কখনো এটা বলেছিলাম, when the system is in equilibrium, okay, the money supply has changed, but the real sector is in equilibrium. I'm at a full employment output, and and the money supply has changed over here. In these circumstances, if prices double, wages will also double. Okay, but I am at equilibrium, and I will remain at equilibrium. Here, I'm not in equilibrium. There's unemployment, and I'm trying to come back to this point. So, real wage will not be constant. Real wage is this, and I want real wage to fall and come back to this level. Okay?
Yes, sir.
So I'm talking about two completely different situations, employment, and this is not in equilibrium, and this is not in equilibrium. Okay, so now if the fall in price is less than the fall in money wages falls by half, but prices fall by a smaller margin. In that case, no, sorry, এখানে আমার ভুল হয়েছে, এটা fall in price is higher than the fall in. Okay, so money wages gets half, 50% reduction. The fall in price is more, 75%. So what will happen to real wages? Real wage is going to fall. Okay. And if real wages falls, I'm going to move from this point to this point. Okay. So ultimately, unemployment is eliminated and labor market equilibrium is restored in the labor market. So is it clear, everyone? Okay. I'm going to end at this point. Can we still have unemployment somehow? Remember, unemployment means a person is not working and is actively seeking work. So, for instance, all of you, you are not working, are you? You should not be, at least. So, will I call you unemployed? No, because you don't satisfy the second criteria. You satisfy the first criteria, you're not working, but you're not actively seeking work. Consider those of you who have grandparents. They are retired, they are not neither working nor seeking work. So they are also not unemployed. Mothers who are not working, housewives, they also don't satisfy the second criteria. In the classical model, when I'm talking about full employment equilibrium, it means that all those who are not working, there are no people who are not working and seeking work. However, you can still have unemployment. You can have what is called frictional unemployment because there are certain obstacles or imperfections in the labor market. People may be searching for jobs, they will get the job, but it takes time. Even if they get the job, they may be in the process of shifting jobs. So they have resigned today, they are going to another city and joining on Friday. So Thursday, if you go and ask them, they will say that I'm unemployed. Firms may be in the process of recruiting persons. So because of these reasons, you're going to arrive ultimately at full employment. But at any particular point, there will be some persons who are not working but who want work. You will have unemployment. They will soon get a job. The adjustment mechanism is such that they are going to get a job. But they will get the job after some time. A very small time interval, but still the time interval is positive. So this is sometimes also called the natural rate of unemployment. So there are frictions in the job market. Firms take some time in recruiting. People search for jobs. They don't get that there's a job, but they don't know there's a job. They may be in the process of shifting jobs. So this will lead to a natural rate of unemployment. So at any point of time, there will be some workers, some unemployment, but the the specific workers who are unemployed today will get a job soon, and you will always have this batch is going to get replenished. Okay, so I'll end at this point, and on the next day, I will go to the policy making in the classical model. I
So
think
could
it's a
you
bit
show the previous slide?
this one.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, 2 slides back. Sir.
আচ্ছা, let Kritika, sorry, let Upanita finish this and then I'll go back. একটু ওয়েট করো, হ্যাঁ? By the way, I have a question for you also. Clear your doubts, and I'll ask my questions.
Thank you, sir.
হ্যাঁ, অয়ন কোনটা এইটে?
Yes, sir. So the fall in price is lower than the fall in money wages. Means I'm saying this should happen. What you had written earlier was correct.
ওটা কারেক্ট ছিল না। রিয়েল ওয়েজটা তোমার ফল না কেন হবে? Let me take an example. Suppose the real wage should be, let us suppose 10. Okay. আচ্ছা, sorry, P is suppose 20 and W is suppose, না এটা 20 করে লাভ নেই। রিয়েল ওয়েজকে 5 করে দিই। So what is this? This is 10. Okay, so you have unemployment. Okay, so real wage will fall. Let us say W falls to 20. How much should P fall?
So 4.
P will be 4. Yeah.
So then P is same. There is no change.
না তাহলে এটাকে 10, এইটাকে 10 করে দিই। So P will be 2.5. না এটা তো 5 হতে হবে, সরি 2 হবে, তাই না?
Yes, sir.
So price is falls by 50%. This falls by 4 times. Yeah, so you're right. The price is fall in price is less. So there's some comparative statics that I want to show you using Kramer's rule, and then we'll go to the policy making. Okay. Acha, tell me, has GC told you what parts she is going to cover? Acha, do you have any other questions? Okay. I'm switching off the recording.